goes and asks to do your check-in.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know for me or what it is, but
It's boot camp.
oh, is that with, not really. Who's your instructor?
I think it is.
Is it Renee?
Yeah.
Yeah. When you go into Bible Board by next Tuesday, she'll have specific directions for what she wants you to do.
Okay, thank you.
You have to exercise in your driveway and basement.
I know.
Videotape yourself doing it and send it to her.
Tape, so we know that you're actually doing
Make sure the timer is running so you get it all 20 minutes.
Yeah.
it.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get
Well,
started.
before, Nelson, I just go
Yeah,
ahead.
sure.
Yeah, just watch out for the cords. Again, just in terms of the class in general, because you already asked about how we're gonna handle this, so it'll be more clear when we meet on Monday, and we have classes on Monday and Wednesday, so we'll talk about in detail how we're gonna get everything done, so. You guys stay calm, let me get rattled, so.
Yeah, we're the ones over 60, we can get that.
I'm closing in on 70, so I can easily get rattled, but it isn't so much the age, it's just like trying to cope with all this. But with that, so everybody calm down, enjoy your weekend, and we'll figure this out. I just need some time to get it all sorted out in my own head. So I guess with that, I can turn it over to you, Nelson.
Okay. I want to begin by thanking SUNY Fredonia. It is because of SUNY Fredonia that we have our special guest this morning. We work very collaboratively with the Global Learning Office at SUNY Fredonia, Naomi Baldwin from that office, get that out there. But we are privileged to have two distinguished guests with us this morning. And I'm going to introduce the first one, who is Faris Al-Nasser, who is actually from Fredonia right now, but he can tell you a little bit more about his background. And it is through his sponsorship and support that we have our other guests, but Faris is going to handle the next part of the introduction. And just want to make sure you're careful in the corners.
I got it. Okay.
And just in the interest of full disclosure, obviously we have two students in Leon, one in Dunkirk, three here right now, there's one missing. And then this is.
So they're in Dunkirk?
Over there, Madison's in Dunkirk. President Abbas and her cohort, that's why I call her President Abbas, because she is for the simulation, she's President Abbas. Much younger. And they're in Olean. And of course, we're in Jamestown. And then just again, to be clear that this goes on YouTube Public because we have two remote students who watch the discussion and the lectures and participate that way. So it's not a three-way, it's a four-way. But it is available to the public. Anybody can go in there and look at it. Not that you necessarily worry about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So President Abbas, are you Lebanese?
No, it's just because that's my title of the simulation.
No, Abbas? Is your family name Abbas?
No, she's President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority.
Oh,
So-
okay.
so
I thought her family name was Abbas.
Actually, once they get a role, I forget their real names. They all have
Oh,
prepared,
good
so
for you.
they're impressive.
Okay, well, my
Sorry
name,
about the confusion.
no, my name is, it's just funny, we've been teaching in Fredonia the last several days, so I'm sorry we didn't invite you under the bridge to come see us over at Fredonia State. I'm born, I was raised in Fredonia, and my father was a professor at Fredonia State for 47 years, passed away a couple of years ago. And in his honor, my family created a scholarship, and the scholarship is actually for a JCC student, largely inspired because my mother took some classes here at JCC late, in her probably in her 60s. She was taking some Spanish classes. So, but my family has a real close tie with this and with JCC, and it's neat to be here talking in front of you. So thanks for the opportunity. So I was raised in Fredonia, so I'm very familiar with this area. I went to school in Colorado, and I spent 21 years in the military. What happened is I've been involved in a program called the Iraq Leadership Fellows, and a good friend of mine, John DeBlasio, he sponsors this program, and it's held in Iraq. What they do is over the course of 1 year, they have 3 training events where they bring all these Iraqis, political and social activists from throughout the country. They bring them to the American University in Sulaymaniyah in northern Iraq, and they teach them courses on advocacy and building campaigns and democracy and communication and negotiation, things like this. So Mustafa was part of that, and I was at the graduation ceremony last summer. Got to meet Mustafa. We hit it off right away. Mustafa and 3 other Iraq Leadership Fellows were selected to come to a leadership training event in Seattle. So Mustafa and another friend of ours, Fermes, they just finished that program in Seattle last week, and we've been doing it for a couple of years, and we realized, it'd be great if we could get U.S. students exposure to what's going on there. Well, it's been really amazing since I met him in July. I don't know if you're following what's going on in Iraq, but the protest, it's just fascinating. It's something really pure, and they're fighting foreign influence, they're fighting corruption, and most of us have been communicating with me every step of the way. It's been a lot of fun. So that's sort of how Mustafa got from Baghdad, where he lives, to northern Iraq, to Seattle, to here. Let me tell you a little bit about Mustafa. He's an incredibly complex individual, very multifaceted. He's a social rights activist. He's a political activist. He's been involved in playing sort of almost like a kingmaker role with the prime minister, the selection of the new prime minister in Iraq. He's a human rights activist. He's done a lot to push human rights in Iraq. He's a journalist. He's a veterinarian by training, but he doesn't do a whole lot of that. But just shows you the kind of the depth that he has. And he's really got an amazing story. And the last thing I'll tell you about him before we get started is back in August, a terrorist group, one of these militias that's dominating the system in Iraq, they put a price on his head. So they published Mustafa and 42 other names of people that they want killed for their accusing them of being spies of the U.S. It's a lot of BS. Really, what they don't like about these people is these people are reporting the truth and they're shedding light on the truth, and that probably more than anything else. I mean, in any country, that's anybody who's corrupt. And so I understand this is a Palestinian Affairs class.
Yeah, it's the Palestine Honors class, and in the international negotiations, they're playing the role of Palestine with President Abbas. But we put that in the context of the broader Middle East and touch a little bit on different aspects of what's going on around it.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about most of us are going to talk about some regional stuff. I'll add some context. But I asked him we don't normally do this, but I asked him to make a few comments on the perception of Palestinians in Iraq, which is actually quite interesting and might not be what you expect. They're not as popular as one might think. Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
We're not that popular in the simulation because we use the word demand and it gets people really angry.
Thank you, Pat.
I'm going to get out of your way too.
No, it's okay.
If you want to sit, but as long as they can see you, we're fine.
Okay. So we're talking about Palestinian issue, and from Iraqi people, we have 2 types. I think there are 2 types of people that find themselves involved or not involved in Palestine issue. The majority of people in Iraq find themselves not involved in Palestine issue. And there is minority who find themselves involved in that. And let me explain why the majority of Iraqi people don't think themselves they are part of this long-term conflict in the region. And that thing came with this history of conflict that Iraqi people suffering from, because we have since the 80s we have that conflict with Iran, and then we have Kuwait invasion. So it's more than 4 decades of war, internal war, and there's that conflict with the borders. So the people in Iraq, they used to be soldiers for political reasons. And all these, since the Republic Revolution, they suffering from dictatorship. And you know, the Arabic dictatorship used the Palestinian issue very well as to supporting the regime and ruling in Iraq. So, and after 2003, we find, you know, Palestine came from this militia that the majority hate them because they killing the people, they involve in the sectarian conflict, and from that thing, that thought, we don't care about Palestinian issue anymore. And in addition of that, we have a problem of these jihadist, Sunni jihadist group that fight in Iraq, and there is huge number of them were Palestinian people. And if we go to the media, we have these opinions of Palestine to supporting Saddam regime, and you know, Iraq people suffering from Saddam. So we have that huge disagreement and between these people, and we have the majority of people who start to hate to talking about Palestine issue because they already suffering from a huge conflict history. They have their reason and their daily conflict in their lives. So external issue like Palestine, they didn't care about it anymore. And you know, but for me, I think that the most important thing that make the majority of Iraqi people don't care about Palestinian issues, all the dictatorship and these militia groups and all political leaders, and they are corrupted, they're killing people, etc., etc. All of them trying to use Palestine to empowering themselves. So I will stop at this point because there's no much detail about that. So, and if you have any question or something like that. Faris, would you like to say something about Palestine? Yeah, because you live in the Middle East and you know everyone. Maybe you can start you?
Yeah. So I just got back from Jordan last Friday. So I was there for a couple of weeks. You know, the Palestinian issue is so sensitive there. You know, Black September happened in September 1971 or 70. Was it 70 or 71? I think it was 71. And this was you know, the PLO and the Jordanian armed forces fighting in the streets, and it got really ugly. And it's still a significant part of the culture and the politics in Jordan. Jordan is probably over 2/3 of the population is actually Palestinian. You know, what happened is for generations, the East Bank Jordanians, or basically the non-Palestinian Jordanians, they've been getting good jobs in the government. They've been taken care of. They've sort of there's certain families the king turns to for jobs in the military, the security services, and ministerial positions. And frankly, my family's Jordanian. My family's part of that sort of East Bank culture. But what's been happening in recent years is the Palestinians have, they were always kind of these poor refugees suffering in Jordan, but there's so many of them suffering, but many of them have become quite wealthy businessmen. So actually some of the most wealthy people in Jordan now are Palestinians and some of the poorest people. So it's kind of, there's been this sort of dichotomy of classes almost there. That gets complicated as well because a lot of people feel like she is siphoning many of Jordan's resources off for the Palestinian people. I don't know what's happening, it's nearly impossible to know what's really happening, but there's a lot of frustration. Have received some favoritism because of her status, and it gets, I'm almost hesitant to get any deeper into it because it gets so inflamed, but just to know, I think the context I can offer is, it's, in Jordan at least, it is a highly sensitive and highly politicized issue.
So it's different views from region to region.
Yeah, in Iraq, it's a non-issue.
Yeah,
Actually, something else there is an Iraq angle here that plays in. The Palestinian, there were a lot of Palestinians, so, you know, we had the 67 war, you had so many refugees come out of Palestine in 67. And a lot of them were very highly educated, they were engineers, they were intelligent, they were a lot of them were professionals. A lot of them ended up in the Gulf states. So, because if you recall, you know, late 60s, early 70s is when countries like Kuwait, UAE, Saudi Arabia were really kind of rising. So a lot of Palestinians went to the Gulf states, and one thing that happened was when Saddam invaded Kuwait in 1990, many of those Palestinians in Kuwait, they sided with Saddam. They basically welcomed him in because they saw him as their liberator, and many of them had this idea. Am I portraying this accurately?
yeah, that's true. Arabic leader for the Arabic nation.
Yeah, so they thought maybe that Kuwait was going to, and all the wealth of Kuwait was going to be turned over to them. And I think even in some ways, Saddam probably even encouraged this, right?
Yeah, especially inside Iraq, they give them a free apartment, salaries, insurance, these things. When the Iraqi people were suffering from recession and they were poor because of the war and these things, and they go to the battlefield to fight Iran where the Palestinian living in good way. So that's create the huge gap between Iraqi and Palestinian people, because until now, we always in the media, we see Palestinian people try to put in Saddam photos in their cars, and they have these ceremonies to talking about Saddam. The Iraqi people hate that.
So when I was in Jordan, I saw a lot of bumper stickers with Saddam. I saw a lot of Saddam bumper stickers there. I assume most of them were probably Palestinians who were supporting.
Yeah.
But back to the Kuwait issue. So what happened was there were all these Palestinians that were doing very well in the Gulf region. And because most of them are Muslims, and because all of them are fellow Arabs, they sort of had to be taken care of in a decent fashion. So what happened is after 1990, suddenly, and the Palestinians suddenly kind of sided with Saddam against their Kuwaiti hosts. When the Kuwaitis came back, the Kuwaitis kicked all of the Palestinians out. And in fact, a lot of the other Gulf nations also kicked Palestinians out because they almost saw them as a fifth element within their own societies. So it really hurt the Palestinians, but a lot of them had good work there. So, and most of them were not guilty of this, but there was kind of across the board, there was a policy to kick the Palestinians out. Because King Hussein had given them Jordanian passports, the only place they had to go was back to Jordan. And Jordan's a small country with not many resources. So it wasn't that crowded when I was there in the summer of 90. But when I went back in the summer of 1991, suddenly the streets are just packed with, there's traffic and there's a lot of Palestinians, and they're all desperate looking for jobs. And anytime you have these mass migrations of people, you just have this incredible stress that's put on the system, and it creates, more stress. So anyhow, that's a snapshot of some of my observations.
Yeah, that's true. I think let's take some questions. If you have a question, you have questions.
It's up to you. You saw the presentation you gave before. Do we want to address some Palestinian affairs, or do we
Well,
want
we
to go?
can see if anyone has a question first before we go on to what you did this morning, which was also very interesting. I appreciate, though, your comments about putting the Palestinian issue in the broader regional context, because obviously that's important, although we've been focusing on, in my class, because we have to play the role of the PA, we've become Palestinians, but, but it's good to know what's going on
So
in Jordan.
complex.
Oh, yeah, it's incredibly complex.
The Palestinians, they've been screwed over at every turn by
Yeah.
Well,
everyone.
that's certainly our position,
Yeah.
and President Abbas, there's a simulation moderator who normally gets mad at my North Korean delegation for being too assertive and aggressive. The irony is that this time they got a tad annoyed at us for being too assertive and aggressive, because we used the word demand, and like we demanded an independent nation state. We're still coming up with a response, but it's been fun. So, but it's good to hear those comments. So I don't know if anyone in OAN, Dunkirk, or Jamestown has a question for you, but we can pause for a second and see.
No questions?
Okay.
So, we now talking about Iraq. Yes.
Thank you.
So, let's talk about Iraq and Iraqi situation right now. Iraqi history, rich with conflict, and especially sectarian and ethnic conflict. And that brings the people to the point when they feel that there's no hope to life, and everyone tried to leave the country, and that these things not just happen by coincidence. It's happened by I think it's two things affected on Iraqi people in this period. The first thing is the social norms and the culture that are present in the community. Most Iraqi people, very religious people, and they have this tradition, and they have these community issues inside the families, inside the small communities, and they have that ethnic belief and religious. If you are religious, you will go with one of these groups of people. And the second thing, it was the long term of war and dictatorship. Because, we're talking about four decades of war in Iraq, so it's affected on the people and make them suffering for a long time. And also the dictatorship supporting and promoting and motivating the people to be more religious. And Kuwait invasion in 2003, with that war, with that section, create huge number of people that very, very religious people and extremist people. After 2003, we have that invasion and new democracy that changed the situation in Iraq. And with this democracy, all the ethnic conflict and sectarian conflict rise up and start to be part of shaping the government and dividing of the power in Iraq. I don't know who, but someone just think about it, and he think this is a good idea to dividing the power in Iraq, because right now we have, since 2003 until now, we always giving the position of the president to Kurdish person, and we giving the position of the prime minister for Shia person, and giving the secretary of the parliament for Sunni person. Iraq parliament regime, the Iraqi people can select the parliament, but they cannot decide who will be in a president position or prime minister position. So that makes the things worse by the time, because we have these extremist values and these ethnic groups And on the other side, we have that type of democracy. So that bring the bad people and qualified people to the power all the time. And these powerful people, because if you are living in ethnic group, the most extremist person will be the hero of the community, of that community. Because everyone try to follow this tradition, try to follow that religion, and hold it, protect these people. So most of them unqualified people, and they are extremist people, and they have their own militia. He has political party. He believe in democracy, but on the other hand, he has this militia that fight for him, fight for this ethnic group, killing the people, doing the illegal thing for him. And due to that huge control of these militia and Islamic political parties leaders in the power, with the issue of economy, Iraq economy depending on selling oil, and we have small private sector that the majority of employee working with the government. We have more than 3,500,000 employees in the government. So if you want, as a graduated, if you want to go to apply for a job, you find yourself going to the government. And the government controlled by these militia guys and these political parties. So they want your loyalty to take that position. That's why we have no choices, too many choices in Iraq. Most of your people find themselves inside that circle and find themselves involved by the time with this of the government or the state. That happened until 2014 when ISIS started to change. Facebook is a very powerful tool in Iraq. We have 2 of the 3 Iraqi use Facebook. That means more than 20 million Facebook accounts in Iraq. So in the beginning, as activists, we start to create campaigns. For me, I start between 2008 2009 to writing some thoughts through my Facebook account and adding people to this group and to create dialogue, discussions, and put some question how we explain the religion, how we identify ourselves. Are we Iraqi, Sunni, Shia? Why we have these extremists? Especially after ISIS, we start to have a huge wave of these discussions inside the community through the Facebook. And they start to put same question and answer it. That motivates the people to find new path for their life. Also, during our work as a team, we try to create new heroes for Iraqi people. We talk about these militia leaders that become heroes for their community. But in Iraq, in our case, we try to go to different churches. So we have special forces in Iraq. Part of the special forces, we call them Golden Division. This Golden Division is very professional fighters, and they train well. They have good weapons. If you just go to one of these guys and ask him who you are you Kurdish, Sunni, Shia, which ethnic group? He just will answer, no, I am Iraqi. So we start through the social media. We start focusing on these guys and tell the people this and dialogue. And this new hero, the people who start by the time, especially the young generation, than the old generation. For example, in my father's age, he spent his life under dictatorship, and He spent his life as a fighter with the Iraqi army that Saddam regime used all the time. So if he tried to understand the whole politics or try to understand the democracy, due to his education, his experience, it's hard to understand for him. Sometimes he misunderstood it or translated to from Saddam or dictator until last September. These militia leaders find that the Golden Division grow up politically side, because these leaders try to be stars in the Iraqi community. So they decide to fire one of them they fired the leader of that division. His name is General Abdel Wahab Saadi. So when they fired him at the end of the September, the protest triggered on first day of October. So on the first day, they start this young man and woman go to this street and to protest because they start to say no for all that social norms, all that division, sectarian conflict, all of that. So if we try to explain the situation, may Faris help me in that, if we can do something to explain how this militia and where is the state, where is Iran that's supporting these guys?
All right. What's up?
I'm sorry, what were you gonna ask
Do you
me?
have a marker in there? More.
Like, do you have one of those, not the thick ones, but the,
No.
Okay.
She has a highlighter.
So what we have in the US system is largely, we have a state that's pretty well functioning. We can debate, whether it's functioning better or worse at different times. But bottom line is, the streets generally get plowed and the garbage gets picked up, and usually the water is okay to drink, and there's good public system and so forth. And all of those institutions, they reinforce the state. What we have in Iraq is a situation where the state is extremely weak, or the institutions are weak. Therefore, the state is weak and the democracy is somewhat weak. So what's filling that vacuum? Well, what we see, and you've heard most of us talking a lot about these militias, right? These militias are very powerful, and they dominate much of the political and even social affairs in the country. So if you want I can't remember if you said it in this class or not, but if you want a job, or if you want to start a business, or you want to be a professor, or you want to get into a school, you have to kowtow to these militias. For the most part, they're Iraqis, but they're supported by Iran. So of course that gives us the third the third element of our Venn diagram here, of course, is Iran. And Iran has a heavy influence on that state and the state affairs. Mustafa describes it another way. He draws a very small state bubble. He would argue the state is extremely small, and the state is completely engulfed by the militias. And then you have the Iranian influence weighing heavy on both the state and the militia. In either case, you get the point, whether, regardless of which diagram you adhere to, and it's not always clear which one is the best diagram, but in either case, the state is weak and it's heavily influenced by the militias and the Iranians.
Can we explain the identity?
Okay. So that's one diagram we've been using. The other diagram is we were talking about, he was completely dominated by the Saddam Hussein and the Ba'athist regime. And this was a very powerful machine that basically gave people their identity. What's interesting to me is when I go to Iraq in the summers and I interact with Iraqis, particularly like, let's say 35 and above. I'm 50 years old, so people, between 35 and above, like Saddam is still alive. Like he's still, like psychologically, he dominates their mindset. They talk about him, they think about him. He's still like, it's weird. He's still ever present. That shows you just how dominating that Saddam Ba'athist machine was. So what happened is in 2003, the U.S. invades. We eliminate that the functions of the Ba'athist and Saddam, and suddenly people started returning to their kind of ethnic or religious identities. Kurdish, and their Sunni identities. And I say sectarian / religious because Kurdish is actually an ethnicity. Okay, so these two people, well, they're actually all Muslims, because even the Kurds, it gets confusing because the Kurds are Sunni, but they're not Arab. Does that make sense? The Shia are not Sunni, but they're Arab. The Sunni, and this is where it gets so complicated because now we're crossing, we're sort of meshing sectarian and ethnicities, and it gets very complicated. But bottom line is these identities, these strong sectarian ethnic identities started to prevail. And then what we saw in later years is we saw extremist versions of these developing. For the Kurds suddenly wanted an independent nation, or at the very least, a federated system with a lot of independence. This terrified the Iraqis because that's where most of the oil was. A lot of the wealth was in the Kurdish region. So that became a big problem. We saw the extremism of Sunni Iraqis are ISIS or Daesh, but that was sort of the extreme form of their identity. And then with the Shias, we saw the development of these militias that we've been talking, these Iranian-sponsored militias we've been talking about above. We saw that happening. When Mustafa says that ISIS was actually a good thing for Iraq, it started to unify the Iraqi people, especially the youth, people of your generation. And people started saying, no, I'm not Kurdish, I'm not Shia, I'm not Sunni, I am Iraqi. I have an Iraqi national identity, and I'm Iraqi first and foremost. That's one of the things that's so beautiful about this revolution that's occurring, because it's a very pure and it's a very nationalist-based revolution. Can I switch the camera back?
Yeah.
Is it? I wasn't paying attention. Sorry.
Okay.
So these youths try to change that situation. They believe it's kind of revolution against all these social norms and tradition and ethnic and sectarian identity. Also, they against this taboo in the community. They try to say no to be an extremist, and they believe in democracy, freedom, human rights. They try to, it's kind of revolution against the old generation. For example, when Muqtada Sadr is one of religious Shia leader, and he has his own militia. He just, before 1 month, he tweeted something, says that it's not acceptable to mix between men and women in the protest. And the second day, young ladies started to organize themselves, and there was a huge protest against them. And since October until now, the militia and riot police and all these forces killed more than 600 protesters. And by different ways, they killed them during the protest. I will stop now, and if you have any question, I give time for the question or anything you want.
Yeah, we have a few minutes for questions, and I know we got started a little later here than we did in the other class, but it's because of the peculiarities of the way I have to teach this, but, anybody have a question?
Yes.
Yes.
This is more like on a personal level for you. What brought you into journalism? Because you went to school for veterinarian work.
Yeah.
So was it part of the upbrought? Like, is it part of like you or?
In Iraq, the government choose us what we study.
Oh.
Yeah, they give us kind of paper and we put what we want to go to study. Then they choose something from that list. So what brought me to veterinary medicine in that way. But what made me journalist, I remember when I went in the first class and to create this northern Iraq, when I entered the classroom, I find the girl sitting on that side and the boy sitting on that side, and there is a space between them. And everyone said there is no activity, they're doing nothing, just go to the class and to go to the cafeteria, and then they go to home. And I started thinking what to do. I was very active on social media, so I go to 3 of my friends. I tell them, guys, why we start to create magazine in this college? And then I open my computer. These days was the computer allowed in the university because they use it to some terrorist act. So I hide it in my bag and start using and design that magazine. After day, after these years, I find myself working as journalist. Any more questions?
Yeah, we only have about a minute, but, maybe a quick one. Does anybody has one?
I want to hear from Olean.
Oh, we have a question from President Abbas.
Yeah, yes, please.
So you talked about how the young people in Iraq are really changing the view, and they're the ones who are protesting. Do you think that the young people of Palestine are the ones who should also make the stand and demand change?
I heard the wow.
I don't know. In Iraq, we don't care about Palestine. I say that frankly because we have enough issue in our country. But in Palestine, they're suffering from this old generation that put them in that situation with Israelis. They put them in that situation with Iraqi people. I think all the governments in Middle East try to support Palestinians because that brings them more power. But maybe the most of the normal people don't like to be involved with any fight outside their country. So it's kind of complicated thing. So that's why I couldn't answer your question if the Palestinian should be involved with the protest. And because I don't understand the internal Palestinian situation. I'm sorry.
You have to take my class.
Nobody understands. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could have a round of applause for our speakers, please. Thank you very much, and I'll see you all on Monday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here, let me give you my business card.
I'm sorry I forget my business
I didn't forget.
Yeah.
But we're in my building, so you get right out of my office.
I will send it.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.